am Dennis Melby with the Republican Party. For the folks at home, let's get started now. And as more folks join us, we'll let them in. Okay, we have an hour program and our honored speakers have other commitments after that. I'm glad you're able to join us by technology here. We have a great Zoom presentation for us right now. Join me and we can have a wonderful discussion. It's good to see so many good-looking guests, fellow Republicans and Central Committee members. With me working the seminar are committee members Jamie Greedon, Brad Botwin is here, and Paul Agel. Today we have three great speakers and time permitting questions at the end. If you're familiar with Zoom, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Just tap it and type in your question, and we'll be able to ask it of the panel after they make their comments. Of course, this September brings us Labor Day, Yom Kippur, Hispanic History Month, and the first day of autumn. After this year, adding to our remembrance in history was the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attack, a horror we hope to never see again. On behalf of the Republican Party, thank you to our great allies in our fight for freedom. And a special thanks to the first responders, the servicemen and women, and those who have paid the ultimate price preserving our freedom. God bless them all. In our webinar series every month, we explore important issues facing our community. Last month, our discussion was about the issues we face with one-party control of the legislature in Annapolis. Senator Huff and Delegate Arakan were right on the money, presenting the need to end one-party rule in Annapolis. You know, in recent years, American citizens have risen to the challenges posed by left-wing politicians and their tax and spend deficit-creating policies. Their new and never-ending social welfare programs and anti-police policies, which lead to rising crime and growing illegal immigration, all designed to weaken our nation. The Tea Party movement, followed by the Trump revolution, were positive national reactions to the leftist Democrats' attempt at the fundamental transformation of America. Tell me, where are the moderate Democrats? Now, a new neo-Marxist ideology, the baseline of, it seems, all leftist Democratic Party initiatives, has emerged from the bowels of the leftist universities. Packaged under the term critical race theory, it is an amalgamation of anti-American ideologies which crush diversity of opinion, pit whites, people without color, against the so-called people of color, and demand the destruction of our racist founding principles and our Constitution. Let me quote our esteemed president. Come on, man, you know the story. It's institutional racism. Just look at how our county government acts. Look at our county public schools and many of our county private schools pursuing a woke curriculum. Tonight's speakers will delve into the actual critical race theory-based activities underway on universities and college campuses, K through 12 schools, and the private sector. They'll also try to give us insights into how we can work together to stop and reverse the spread of these hateful and destructive activities which are tearing our nation apart. Jennifer Kabani is the editor of The College Fix, a publication of the Student Free Press Association, and reports on the ever-growing leftist cancel culture flourishing on campuses nationwide. She works with college-age writers, bloggers, tweeters, podcasters, and viral video makers for the purpose of identifying and supporting young people who seek to improve campus journalism, to explore careers in the media, and who wish to commit themselves to the principles of a free society. She's also a visiting fellow with the Independent Women's Forum and has worked in various capacities for the North County Times and the San Diego Union Tribune newspapers, and as associate editor of Front Page magazine, as well as held editorial positions at the Weekly Standard and the Washington Times. She's been a Robert Novak Journalism Fellowship recipient and has contributed to National Review. And she graduated from San Diego State University, where she served as editor of the Daily Aztec. Ms. Cabani, please give us your thoughts on what's happening today in America's education system.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you all this evening. And I am coming to you live from Southern California, where tomorrow, God willing, we may actually evict our pompous, good-for-nothing Governor Gavin Newsom. So we'll see how that goes. But I live in the land of ballot harvesting, so I'm not holding my breath. But as I look east toward Maryland and across this fruited plain, I'm sure many Americans can relate to that sense of frustration and righteous anger that we feel as we see our government grow larger and larger and continue to take our freedoms away from us. And, they've oppressed us with unconstitutional mandates, overreaching gun laws, absurd COVID rules and regulations. A little over 200 years ago, the Declaration of Independence included 27 specific grievances against King George and the British government. And today's atmosphere almost calls for a similar list of grievances to be pinned against our current president and the controlling party in Congress. So what does this have to do with higher education? And I will definitely be talking about critical race theory in the classroom. But I wanted to start off by laying the groundwork because I wanted to explain what's at stake. And what is stake is at the very heart and soul and stability of our nation and its future. Vladimir Lenin famously said, "Give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed I plant will never be uprooted." And the left took this advice and has succeeded on a massive scale. Students in both K-12 and higher education are taught that America is not the land of opportunity, that slavery is an institution unique to Western civilization, that our country was founded on slavery, and that the American Revolution was fought to maintain slavery, that our founding fathers were evil racists. Under critical race theory, young people are taught that every problem seen in America today can be traced directly back to slavery. And how widespread is this teaching? Critical race theory narrative is enshrined as fact in upwards of 4,500 schools, thanks to them embedding the 1619 Project curriculum into their classrooms. This narrative absolutely enshrines a simplistic caricature of our founders as villains and lays a groundwork for critical race theory to take root in young minds. They're often only taught one side. And that's why a high school teacher or college professor can say America is systemically racist, and they don't have to go into much detail or argue their point with data or facts or statistics. This narrative is ingrained in young minds like propaganda and becomes accepted as fact. Did you know that the University of Maryland School of Public Policy requires its faculty to put on their syllabus the following statement, quote, "We are gathered on the stolen land of the Piscataway Conoy people, and were founded upon the erasure and exploitation of many non-European peoples." The University of Maryland's Department of Resident Life has also placed multicultural advocates inside dorms to promote diversity and inclusion efforts. The University of Minnesota has offered a 12-step recovery plan for whiteness. One step for students is, quote, "We admitted that we had been socially conditioned by the ideology of white supremacy." At James Madison University just last month, its student employees were divided into oppressor and oppressed groups based on their race, sex, religion, age, and other characteristics. On the 2 slides, identities including white, heterosexual, able-bodied, and cisgender were placed on the privileged side of the table, and identities like Black, Asian, Latinx, gay, and disabled, and women were placed on the oppressed side of the table. One huge aspect of critical race theory is this vague notion of whiteness. A recent elementary school lesson on whiteness claimed that sympathy with law enforcement is racist. A Trinity College professor has equated whiteness with terrorism. Brittany Cooper, she's a professor of women, gender, and Africana studies, has even argued that the very concept of time is racist. She says that the way we, quote, position ourselves in relationship to time comes out of histories of European and Western thought. In 2019, a University of Illinois Chicago professor was reported to his superiors for urging students to turn an assignment in on time. And in 2020, a UCLA suspended a professor for questioning a proposal to give Black students preferential grading. Another characteristic of white supremacy includes using correct grammar, according to CRT. In July 2020, in the wake of George Floyd, the English department at Rutgers University announced a list of anti-racist directives and initiatives that included an effort to reduce the need for traditional grammar rules. They called it critical grammar pedagogy. So a memo from the dean explained it like this, quote, "This approach challenges the familiar dogma that writing instruction should limit emphasis on grammar sentence level issues so as not to put students from multilingual, non-standard academic English backgrounds at a disadvantage." This is just the tip of the iceberg. As critical race theory burgeons within higher education, campus writing centers across the nation have taken the cue, with a growing number trading in traditional grammar, spelling, and punctuation corrections for a focus on anti-racism. One group of scholars calling for, quote, Black linguistic justice demands that, quote, "we must teach Black students about anti-Black linguistic racism and white linguistic supremacy," end quote. But wait, it gets worse because they're coming after math too. Under critical race theory, a growing number of scholars argue that white supremacy culture shows up in the classrooms when students are required to show their work in math class. So this dogma, which is actually funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, this particular math lesson, has been officially banned in Oregon schools and is coming to California schools, and it's probably coming to a school near you soon too. This is why government schools and higher education is one of the most important battlegrounds for the heart and soul and mind and future of our nation. And make no mistake, we have lost this ground. We have lost this war. Government schools and higher education are no longer under the control of good-natured people with altruistic goals of a well-rounded education to inform and produce a good citizenry. You know, finally, parents are starting to wake up, and we see that with these video vignettes that go viral of parents telling school board members and administrators that what they're doing is wrong and evil. And we see that there's been some state legislatures that have taken action against critical race theory in the classroom. 9 states so far, but that's 9 out of 50. In my opinion, it's like building a sandcastle against a tsunami. What are we up against today? We're up against schools of education who today train the next wave of teachers to prioritize skin color above all else. You're up against a woke generation of recent college grads who have bought into the notion that America is irredeemably racist. You're up against a populace raised under decades of nanny statism and helicopter parenting, and it's created a generation of absolute wimps. And that's why when a Confederate flag carving was found in a bathroom stall at the University of Maryland in 2017, it sent students fleeing to the counseling center. Higher education created, fed, and bred the concept of a safe space from 2014 to today, and allowed students who were at all upset by something on campus to be coddled and protected. And then we wonder why so many young people are just apathetic and shrugging their shoulders over onerous COVID mandates. Safetyism is the new opiate of the masses, and we can thank colleges and universities in large part for that. You're up against Democratic politicians who are willing to use and abuse this need to suckle at the teat of big government and big brother. You are up against hundreds of millions of Americans who believe their feelings are more important than facts. And that's a sentiment taught and reinforced at colleges and universities. In my 10 years of editing the College Fix, I have never, not once, seen a college president tell students protesting racial injustice the truth, to tell these privileged students what real oppression looks like, to tell them about our shared global history, warts and all, They always coddle, they always acquiesce, they always give in to demands. And why not? Universities are hiring and funding diversity, inclusion, and equity offices to the tune of millions of dollars annually, and that's per campus. These offices and diversicrats need to justify their existence, and they see racism everywhere in everything. That's why Central Connecticut State University in May had to take down a standard steel cape loop hanging from a crane on a construction site on campus because it was shaped like a noose. And that's why the University of Wisconsin-Madison recently hauled away a 42-ton boulder from campus because it had been referred to as a racial slur by a journalist in the 1920s. So how pervasive is real racism on campus? Very rare. Students and professors trip over themselves to be polite and respectful as they can. College campuses are some of the most welcoming, inclusive, safe spaces in the country. Yet the spectacle of false flag racism on campus is far too common. Wilfred Riley, he's an assistant professor of political science at Kentucky State. He's examined more than 200 cases of race hoaxes on college, university, and senior high school campuses in recent past. Among them, at the University of Maryland, for example, in January of 2018, it was an 18-year-old Black man who was arrested for racially charged graffiti found all over the campus. And early this year, a young Black woman in Wisconsin was charged with setting fire to her dorm. She first tried to play it off as a hate crime, but then she got caught by the video cameras in the dorm. In May of this year, 2 Black Penn State professors reported a noose behind their house. It turned out to be part of their neighbor's swing set. The College Fix, we've reported dozens and dozens and dozens of similar examples of hate crime hoaxes on campuses. Critical race theory tells students that all whites are racist and America is racist. And so when examples don't manifest, they're made up in other ways. Look, no one is opposed to teaching the warts of American history. And such an allegation from the left is patently false. But critical race theory teaches a controversial and debatable point of view as fact, as a truth that must be accepted or you're racist. The vast majority of students today are not taught American history. The exceptional American narrative must be accurately passed on for the nation as a whole to preserve itself into the next generation. And right now that's not happening. The opposite's happening. But the reality is our country is the greatest nation in the world. That is why people risk their life and limb to get here. America is where penniless folks can come with a good idea and a hard work ethic and become millionaires. Right now, this nation is being destroyed from within. And ground zero for that battle are schools and universities. I'm going to leave you with this bit of advice, and it's not my advice, it's the good Lord's advice. But Proverbs 22:6 tells us, train up a child in the way they should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. You need to be proactively involved in your child and your grandchildren's education, or we will lose the next generation of the hearts and minds of to the left's narrative. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That's very provocative, and you are so right. I think the administration of all of the schools are afraid of their students and their faculty, and that's something that we have to fight against. Let's bring other people into the discussion. Dr. Carol Swain is an author, editor, and host of the podcast Be the People and Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. I think that's a great title. Her work, Black Faces, Black Interest, has won 3 national awards, and her book, The New White Nationalism in America, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Carol is a former professor of political science at both Princeton and Vanderbilt universities, and is outspoken in her opposition to BLM, I call that Black Lives Marxist, and the dangers posed by radical Islam. In retiring from Vanderbilt, Carol stated that she would miss the students and the rhythm of campus, but I will not miss what American universities have allowed themselves to become. Her opinion pieces have been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Epoch Times. Finally, she holds a PhD from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And Fox News viewers will tell you she's often interviewed in the press, on television, and on radio. Dr. Swain, welcome. Could you give us your perspective, please? I think you're still on mute.
Thank you so much for having me on this forum. And thank you, Jennifer, for summing up what's been taking place on college and university campuses. And I am less concerned about the college and university campuses because pretty much I've given up on them. They are no longer marketplaces of ideas. And like when I started graduate school in the 80s, you had liberal professors, you had conservative professors. If you wanted Marxism, you signed up for a class with the professor who was teaching Marxism. And what I watched happen over a period of 20 years or so is that professors rarely called themselves Marxists, and that the ideas associated with Marxism became integrated across the campus. And so when speech codes and restrictions gave way to political correctness, safe spaces, trigger warnings, and all of that nonsense, that was the manifestation of Marxist ideas controlling the campus. I can also say that after the election of President Obama, that was when we saw it really escalate. And we saw the restorative justice, which grows out of Marxism, affecting the K through 12 education, because it meant that teachers could no longer suspend the children who were violent and disruptive. It also meant that if young people had run-ins with the criminal justice system, they kept being returned home with a revolving door. They were not kept and detained until they actually killed someone or robbed someone or committed such a dangerous crime. The system had to deal with them. And by the time it reached that point, they would have a rap sheet a mile long. And we know that when these crimes take place for juveniles, when they become 21, that record is often expunged. You don't know all the crimes they've been involved in. But that was a part of what I began to notice. And when we talk about critical race theory, and my latest book, which is co-authored with Chris, A Black Eye for America, How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. And the cover, an American flag on flames. I think that critical race theory has been a black eye on America that has hurt us internationally, as well as every institution of America has been tainted by critical race theory, and it's destructive. And it also is part of what I would argue is a progressive agenda related to young white, or maybe old white too, Marxists. And it's not really about advancing the interests of racial and ethnic minorities. Racial and ethnic minorities are being used by people who have an agenda that is very much focused on destroying American society as we know it. And we argue in Black Eye for America that critical race theory is the civil rights issue of our time. And Jennifer, you mentioned on the college campuses that you don't have racism. You have plenty of racism. It's just directed against whites. And so the systemic racism has taken a new form. And the civil rights laws that were put in place in the 1960s to protect Blacks and women, what we find today is that now it's men and it's whites that need those civil rights laws, because sex discrimination is taking place against males and discrimination is taking place against whites, the kind of discrimination that we rejected as a society when we passed the three major civil rights bills of the 1960s. When we passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the 1968 Open Housing Act. That was our nation saying that we would be equal under the law. And I would argue that America is not a systemically racist country against racial and ethnic minorities, but it is becoming systemically racist in the sense that government racism now exists. And when we passed those civil rights acts, we decided how we wanted to treat people under the law. And so we were equal under the law. And so government got out of the business of discrimination at that time. And the discrimination that exists, I would say even today, towards racial and ethnic minorities is pretty much individual discrimination. But now government is back in the act of discriminating against people. And critical race theory is a racist, white supremacist theory because it argues that all white people, even the little infant in the crib, that they are racist because of the color of their skin that's in their DNA. They have a property interest in their whiteness. They need to divest themselves of their whiteness. It tells white people they are responsible for all the evils in the world and that they are superior to every group. They are the only ones that can fix everything that's wrong. They are the only ones that can be racist because they are the only ones that can't. And so when we talk about anti-racism, which white people are supposed to, once they become woke, become active anti-racists, they assume that racial and ethnic minorities can't be racist. And that is the meaning within itself. They assuming that racial and ethnic minorities don't have power. They are victims. They're less able. They've totally rejected equal opportunity because they believe minorities are inferior. And that if you just give them an equal opportunity, they will not be able to compete. And so now we want equity, equal outcomes with lowered standards. And so the era of opening doors and allowing people to compete, which was very successful, and we have had made enormous progress as a nation under the old rules, under the non-discrimination rules, that's being jettisoned for the equal outcomes, the equity. And this whole philosophy of Dr. Martin Luther King judging people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Well, the political left, they want people judged by the color of their skin. They know that if you actually went by the content of their character, they wouldn't stand a chance. And so we don't want to talk about character. We just want to talk about the color of someone's skin. And the racism that's taken place under critical race theory should be rejected by every American because it will doom racial and ethnic minorities to failure. Because when you argue that math is racist and that needs to be a lowered standard or a different standard that would say that you're less capable if you're a racial and ethnic minority, you really can't learn math. Teachers shouldn't grade you, they shouldn't press you. It means that thousands of young Black children, whoever happens to be unfortunate enough to have a school or a teacher that teaches that nonsense, they will not be qualified to become scientists, doctors, architects, pharmacists, even nurses, any field that requires math, where you already have large numbers of Blacks competing. You will have fewer in the future because they want to dumb down the standards so low. And with that, she finished her 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was very good. And actually, you brought up an interesting topic. A couple of months ago, we had yet another discussion about the left and the anti-Asian direction that they're going here in the county schools, because equity would deem that they would have to get the Asians out of the good schools and make it more equitable. So we had a very good discussion on that too. Let me bring in Dr. Shore. Dr. Christopher Shore joined the Marine Corps in 2003 and deployed to Iraq in 2005. Upon returning home, he served as a platoon sergeant in the Marine Corps Reserves and completed his BA in political science, summa cum laude, at the University of California, San Diego. Chris subsequently earned his doctorate in American government at Georgetown University. His dissertation, White Nationalism and Its Challenge to the American Right, addresses the challenge posed by white nationalism to conservatism and to the American political system. He's written and lectured about critical race theory and its corrosive impact on race relations in our country. Finally, he's a most valued resident of Montgomery County and is generous with his ideas and advice to our party. In addition, he'll be coming by headquarters in person Saturday to talk and sign copies of Dr. Swain's and his book, Black Eye for America. So we'll have copies there and a discussion about the book again. Dr. Shore, can you give us a little more perspective on the trauma this Marxist philosophy is bringing to us?
Absolutely. And, and thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Dennis, for hosting, and Jennifer and Carol for your comments so far. I have the interesting position of now following two excellent summaries of critical race theory and trying to sort of fill in gaps where they exist, and there aren't many. So what I'll do my best here to add value for everyone present, but I think both those summaries were fantastic. I think the best place to start might be on the last, piggybacking on the last comment about Asian Americans, because it goes to the fundamental structure of critical race theory, which is that we're talking about something that is Marxist in its overall structural character. And what that means is it views the world in terms of an oppressor group and an oppressed group. And therefore, so that's what characterizes society. And so the thing that defines society is oppression, the oppression of one group or another. And so by simply substituting in whites and men and straight people and cisgendered people and so forth for the bourgeoisie within the Marxist framework, and substituting in people of color, particularly blacks, but also women, but also, gay folks, but also transgender people as victims, as the oppressed within this framework, everything just falls into place from there. So if you understand Marxism, you do understand critical race theory at the level of theory. And you understand why it is, for example, that society has to be overthrown. And you understand why it is that the system is racist, because the system has to be defined by oppression along the prescribed lines that the theory defines. And the way in which American society is justified as systemically racist frequently just doesn't logically follow. So anyone who's familiar with Ibram X. Kendi will have heard, probably will have heard the claim that, he said several interesting things. He said that there are no such things as non-racist policies. They're either racist policies or anti-racist policies. He's also claimed that that the existence of a racial disparity means necessarily that there was some kind of racist, some kind of racism present in the system, right? And of course, we know that that's not the case. Disparities occur all the time. And it's interesting, I mentioned Asian Americans because Asian Americans don't fit neatly in the oppressor or oppressed categories, because in many ways, they are, as a group, doing better than whites on various measures that critical race theorists would use to assign you to an oppressor category. And yet, of course, they're not white. And so then the question is, do they become white and therefore oppressors, or are Asians going to be sort of pushed into the oppressed camp and forced to adopt this sort of this kind of victim mentality, which of course doesn't help anybody. And so you can see the theory struggling to fit people, that it has a predefined idea about the way the world ought to operate, and it's sort of struggling to make that to make it happen in place. And this is also, it goes back to its neo-Marxist origins. The whole notion of a critical theory is not thinking critically about the world, and it's not. It's contrasted by Horkheimer, who's one of the founders of the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School. This is where we get the term critical theory. So the notion of a critical theory is you decide ahead of time what the world ought to look like, and then you critique it relentlessly, right, for failing to adhere to your standard. So again, you start from what you want to find, and then you just make the facts fit. And so that goes to part of the problem we're facing with critical race theory, is that we're not dealing with rational argumentation as we would traditionally understand it. We are dealing with a new religion in many ways. We're dealing with something that provides people with in their view, a compelling vision of the world and of justice and of right, and something that propels them forward in a kind of crusade. And other people have written about the way in which critical race theory sort of perverts and piggybacks on the Christian value system, and it misses some important aspects of Christianity, among them humility and charity and grace and forgiveness. And so what you get is the ideas of innocence and guilt and purity and stain applied not to individuals and not on the basis of your choices, right, but instead to entire groups. And in that worldview, there is no redemption, there is no salvation really, except through a sort of constant self-flagellation, which is where we get the white privilege discourse. It's simultaneously kind of whipping yourself in the back, but it's also patting yourself on the back because you're saying, what a good person I am. And everybody else says, oh, you've accepted your privilege and so forth. So we're dealing with a pernicious and complicated social phenomenon. And we detail this in our book, to great detail. I think I would add maybe 2 more points before we turn it over to questions. One is, I think it's worth focusing specifically on its anti-American character. Now, in some ways, this is obvious, right? It's a philosophy that sets, in line with the 1619 Project, their fellow travelers in the same cultural Marxist space. It sets itself at odds with America's founding. It claims that America's founders were racist and so forth, that they set up a white supremacist system. It's also anti-American in a deeper sense, in that the United States is a nation committed to a set of principles, and those principles are themselves rejected thoroughly by critical race theory. You can read, for example, the introduction to critical race theory by Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanchik, and they talk about how they are skeptical of the liberal premises on which basically the Enlightenment premises. So this is rationalism, individualism, the whole idea of rights. Okay, so they're against rights. So you can understand why the civil rights movement is a bit of a problem, even conceptually, for a critical race theorist, right? They're against equality, as we would understand the term. Equity and equality are at war with one another. Treating people equally often doesn't yield equal results, right? In fact, it almost never equals measurably perfectly equal results, because people are different in tremendous numbers of ways that we can't fully measure, right? So to the degree that we can actually measure outcomes, we will always find inequality. So the argument then becomes that equality itself is an ideology that sustains white supremacy, right? I mean, that's like fully grasp what a departure this is and what a rejection this is of the American values and the American tradition. It goes without saying they're against liberty anywhere they find it as well. So that's probably a quick summation of its anti-American character. I think we should talk a little bit about fighting back, about strategies for resisting critical race theory. We have 2 chapters on this. One is really a big picture strategic framing, and I think maybe we can get to some of that in the questions if it comes up. I would say the more relevant points are in our final chapter. We talk about 10 specific strategies, and I'll summarize them briefly here. We need policy responses, and we also need cultural responses. And one of the concerns I have listening, not obviously this panel, but in other places where critical race theory is being discussed, is there's an idea now that I'm hearing among conservatives that because it is a cultural movement, and it certainly is, that we therefore need cultural responses, and that's somehow sufficient. Cultural responses are necessary, they are not sufficient. The left does not restrict itself to say that because there is a cultural phenomenon that we don't like, we're just going to be hands off, and we're going to sort of we're not going to have politics intrude into people's personal lives. The left tells us that the personal is political, right? The left is all about politics intruding into your personal lives. And so we have to be absolutely aggressive at every level to push to defund or to remove K through 12 critical race theory instruction. We absolutely have to push to protect the civil rights of Americans in the workplace who are being discriminated against, who are being harassed, who are being, compelled to issue these ridiculous confessions of guilt for crimes they've never committed under the guise of equity in the workforce, diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, and so forth. So policy responses are critical, and we should continue to press for this. And Florida's led the way and other states have followed, and this is fantastic news. And ultimately, we do need to take these questions to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, the existing case law or doctrine from the Supreme Court says that creating racially hostile workplaces, creating racially hostile environments in the classroom is a violation of the 14th Amendment. So critical race theory cannot stand, and it's up to the people in this audience to gather the information, to give it to the litigators, to press these claims, and to make and to allow this to happen, to enable this victory that we desperately need. And then on the cultural front, so one of the problems, one of the reasons we've lost business, the business community as an institution, and this is in some ways shocking. The rise of woke capital has kind of shook Republicans to their core, because of course we're pro markets, and therefore you would think that business would support our agenda, and that's been the case historically. But one of what we're finding from research is that when it comes to consumer behavior, folks on the left are far more willing to boycott, to divest, sanction, right, to borrow a phrase, to refuse to patronize businesses that either promote values they disagree with, or frankly just don't aggressively promote their own values. And we have to find a solution to that at some point. I don't know, the gay marriage issue is long and gone. It's not even worth bringing up, except that I can tell you on a personal level, I never once thought I'm not going to go to Starbucks because they have a different opinion. The company has a different opinion on this issue. It just didn't occur to me. Well, it occurred to the left. They operated differently, and they've changed the landscape because they have again inconsistent with the idea of the personal is political. They've taken the political and they've put it into everything, and that's part of what critical race theory is. It's not only a new religion, it's a new religion that doesn't permit quarter from its reach. And so we, I think, as conservatives, as Republicans, are going to have to get a little bit out of our comfort zone to figure out how we can fight this effectively. And I think I'm probably right up on 10 minutes, so I'll surrender the floor back.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate that. Great comments. This is just the beginning of our conversation with you. You'll be there Saturday, and we'll have committee women Carol Smith and Amy Wakekoff, and I believe maybe Lori Halverson there to talk. And it'll be a great get together. I'd like to open it up to questions now. Jamie, do we have questions from the audience?
We do. And the first question, I'm not sure which panelists would like to take it on, but it is, how is it possible to wake up those who have bought into CRT?
Who'd like to take that?
I'll respond. I think a lot of white people have allowed themselves to be silenced, even though more of them are speaking up for their children. They see the harm to their children. But I think one way to approach it is to really focus on the harm to racial and ethnic minorities. And that's a way that you build coalitions. I also think that the more immigrants who speak up, the more racial and ethnic minorities who stand up against it, the stronger case that it makes for change. And people pay attention to those voices, so that it's really important for people to build the coalitions and realize that this is a civil rights issue. It cuts across party, it cuts across race, it cuts across religion. It affects all of our children and all of our institutions. It's morally wrong. In America, we don't shame and bully people because of the color of their skin. because they happen to be born male rather than female, or some other immutable characteristic. So I think you take a principled stance and you connect with people who share your values, and your neighbors who may be Democrats, who may be liberals. I guarantee you that the average people are concerned about this. Don't allow those leaders that you see on TV who seem to be endorsing it. Don't think that they represent America. They don't.
Yeah. Can I add real quick that the deep theory piece about Marxism, about the Frankfurt School, that's probably not what you lead with. I think when you're talking to people, I think Carol's exactly right. You focus on the abusive practices of implementing CRT, right? When people understand that an anti-racist curriculum means demonizing white children and infantilizing Black children, right? Once you've set that groundwork and understand what CRT means in practice, then I think people may be more susceptible to understand the theoretical problems downrange. But I imagine many liberals are probably, they roll their eyes when conservatives say the word Marxism, because it's part of our repertoire. It's not part of theirs. And I think it's probably, I do think you have to have a hard heart to justify a lot of the CRT practices. And people should have to justify it. They should have to say, it's acceptable to make an 8-year-old child rate him or herself according to their power and privilege, and sort of apologize to their peers and all the ridiculous things that Christopher Rufo and others have documented extensively.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
I mean,
Jane?
I would just say equality, equality, equality. That's the hill that we're going to die on. I mean, it's our highest ideal. It's our highest national ideal. And we cannot let them win the war of words on this. So everybody can get behind equality. Let's stick with that.
And one of the things that I think is most important for conservatives and for Christians is to hold your churches accountable, because a lot of pastors, they're embracing social justice and critical race theory. They are clueless about what it really is. And so I think you need to acquaint yourself with why it's unbiblical, why it runs counter, to scriptures and just American ideals, and encourage people to look at biblical justice and, the one race, the human race. But if you go back to the core biblical principles, that's the strongest ground you can stand on. And right now, the church is confused.
Thank you. Jamie, do you have another question?
Yes. And this, Chris kind of touched upon it, but how do we begin to attack CRT in our public schools? You mentioned the cultural responses and the policies, but maybe you can go more in depth in those.
Well, in our book, we have 10 ways that people can begin to tackle it. The most important is understand what it is, because one of the things that we've all noticed is that if you accuse someone of teaching CRT or implementing CRT, they will immediately respond, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing culturally sensitive learning. We're doing educational equity. We're doing civil rights. And so you really need to understand what it looks like so that you can challenge them when they play the word games. And then it runs counter to our civil rights laws and the equal protection clause of the Constitution, and against free speech. And so you're on solid grounds, but you have to know your legal and constitutional rights, and you have to learn how to document things that are taking place. And, we talk about building coalitions and tackling on many different fronts. And so there are 10 suggestions that we have, and those are the ones that we start with, but all 10 are important.
One of the candidates yesterday told me that it's important to know the vocabulary that they're using so that you can counter their arguments. And I think their vocabulary is just gobbledygook.
It is, and we address that very problem in the glossary in part, where we try to get a handle on a lot of the the sort of neologisms, the stuff they're throwing around as a way of obfuscating and sort of just confusing the picture, and in many cases the deceptive language, right? And I would add to the part of challenging CRT is the defensive side, right? And so the offense is we're bringing to bear these really cruel practices in the classroom and the anti-American values, and appealing to values that liberals and moderates and everybody else hold, equality being the main one, right? The defensive side is we're going to be pushed back. It's going to be pushed in our direction. Well, you just don't want to teach American history when it comes to racism. And we need to understand that that is not our position, right? That's never been our position. You know, I'm only 37, but I don't think I doubt anyone present ever had the experience of going through elementary, middle, or high school and not learning about slavery. And that's not the issue. So there are issues with both CRT and 1619 and the wider basket of sort of cultural Marxist revisionism, right? There are issues of fact, which Jennifer mentioned, like historical fabrications about the revolution being fought to defend slavery. There are other absurdities associated with the 1619 project, but apart from all the issues of fact, there's an issue of narrative, and there's an issue of narrative that really, it is the case that the traditional narrative of American history is true. It is far more descriptive of what actually happened. But it's also true that if you wanted to tell a story in which everything is slavery, and the founding documents meant nothing, I mean, you can tell that story. People can have their own stories. There's a problem of its accuracy, but there's also the problem that particular story does no good. It turns people against each other. It turns people against their classmates. It turns them against people who look different from them. It turns them against their country. At some level, it has to sink into somebody's mind, so long as they're not fundamentally oriented towards destroying the nation, and some folks are. But for people who are thinking in terms of racial justice, they do have to understand that there's a vision of American history that we all used to embrace that says that we're founded on these lofty goals and we haven't always hit the mark, right? And we're trying and we're doing better. What CRT offers is a vision in which there were no lofty goals. It was all a lie. It was a smokescreen for white supremacy, right? Those are the competing narratives. And I think people need to understand that that's actually the choice that's occurring when, for example, it goes to the ballot whether you ban CRT teaching in the curriculum. It's not, nobody's saying that discussions of slavery, Jim Crow, you name it, are somehow out of bounds.
Yeah, and I would just add that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if your child is at a public school, you have the right to file what's called a Freedom of Information Act, and know exactly what the curriculum is. And so, you can take a proactive step to learn the truth about what's being taught in the classrooms. And then maybe if you've discovered something, share it with your peers, have it go around, make it go viral, and then storm the school board meeting. Who knows? But sunlight is the best disinfectant, and public schools are obligated to share their curriculum with you. I've seen a lot of talk on social media lately about putting cameras in the classrooms, and I'm almost for it. I'm still like, I'm a little hesitant, like, is that a bridge too far? But part of me is like, hey, they're teaching our kids. We should have a right to know what they're teaching our kids. So I don't know, that might be the next step, just so that we can, see what's really going on in these classrooms.
You know something? I think that if you put the cameras in the classroom, they will find another way. And so we just have to know what their game is and try to get control of the teachers' unions and the system that produces the ideologues.
And this is one of the ideas that we talk about in our chapter 7, is that so the radicals have taken the institutions, right? And most of the institutions we have to take back, but war is an economy. Sometimes you have to displace the institution, sometimes you have to eliminate it. One very viable option for many people, increasingly viable, is homeschooling. It's hard. I mean, I've got my 4-year-old running around here. I don't know that I can do anything useful during the day, but but homeschooling tools are more available than they used to be. There are networks. There are ways in which we can remove the ability of the public schools, and in many cases the private schools, to damage our kids. And then where policy comes in, of course, is allowing public resources to flow to homeschoolers, to flow to vouchers, and so forth. So we can think about, if the schools won't listen to our voice, right? This is the framework. We talk about voice, exit, and then something else we call guerrilla warfare in there. But if they won't listen to our voice, we can exit. We can say, your institution can rot. We'll leave you.
Jamie, I think we can get one more question in.
Sure. And actually, going off of what Jennifer was saying earlier about, putting a light on things, someone was asking, can you repeat the statements that you were stated in the syllabus at the University of Maryland, that they're teaching these kids that are supposedly,
Oh yeah, I found it.
accurate, and but
Let me grab it because
sure.
So the Maryland School of Public Policy requires its faculty to put on their syllabus the following statement. And I don't know Maryland very well, so I might have mispronounced this tribe. Quote, "We are gathered on the stolen land of the Piscataway Kanoi people, and we're founded upon the erasure and exploitation of many non-European peoples." They have to put that on their syllabus now. So, and actually this is quite common. It's called, oh, Dr. Swain, what are those called on the syllabuses where you have to acknowledge that you're on stolen land? They're on all the syllabuses now at this point. Basically disclosure that America was built on stolen land. And
Yeah, I know what you mean. But yeah, there's sort of would it be trigger warning?
yeah, pretty
Because-
much. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
or just an acknowledgement of the white oppression, right? Like,
Right.
we on this syllabus acknowledge, and a lot of meetings now start like that. Not just at the University of Maryland, but most universities, like, we want to start this meeting by acknowledging that we're on the formal tribal land of such and such tribe, and we acknowledge that we stole it and committed genocide, et cetera, et cetera. They like to start their meetings like that now.
What's really interesting for white people is that it doesn't matter if you confess everything that they tell you to confess and you do all of these actions, you're still dismissed by whatever, the epithet that they want to use. You're still a white supremacist. You're still white. You're still all of those things, even if you do the disclaimer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even saw a professor, a feminist gender studies professor, make this big argument about why she thinks it's offensive to ask for your pronouns now. You cannot keep up with the rules and regulations and the norms of everything. I mean, it's like as soon as you give in, they change it on you, and now you're being
That's
offensive
the
again.
nature of academia. That's the nature of academia, because you're paid for coming up with ideas, and the crazier, the more lucrative. And so you have to just keep coming up with something new to be able to get recognition. Everyone's scrambling to be seen and heard. So the more bizarre, the more attention.
Well, I really appreciate this. Usually on TV, you have like 4 minutes to make your case, and here we're doing much better. I think it's great, and the Republican Party here is to fight these crazy ideas, and we're going to continue to do that. And I want to thank you all for your thoughtful comments. It's given everybody something to think about, to act on as we continue to struggle on this pernicious philosophy that's been foisted on our society. Jennifer, Carol, and Chris will make sure everybody has your contact information after tonight so they can reach you, and also any further information that you would care to pass on, send it to me and I'll send it out. We'll also include websites so folks can help support your cause. We think we're at capacity for our Zoom viewership tonight, so the folks that couldn't get in did register, we've recorded the presentation and we'll send them a copy of that. We do hope to see many of you on Saturday from 11 to 1 at GOP headquarters. If you go to mcgop.com for the address and the event schedule for the book chat signing and sale, that would be good. And folks, please make sure you continue to stay in touch with your local Republican Party. We need to hear from you and intend to keep reaching out to you for help, support, guidance, and fresh ideas. You can always email us at newsletter@mcgop.com. That's newsletter@mcgop.com. And yes, we're already planning our October Mondays with Mocha. I will send you the announcement and also post it in our newsletter, The Party Line. Jennifer Cabani, Carol Swain, and Christopher Shore, thank you for your thoughts and all you're doing to inform our country on this important topic.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's all from here in the Republican Party. I'm Dennis Melby. Have a good night and a good September.
Good night.
You too.